We're back at it for another week of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's Monday. It's Memorial Day, but we still got a little Pitt talk to get you through the day, or get you started at least. We're not going to take up your whole day. This isn't going to be a 12-hour episode of the Morning Pitt talking about Pitt's 2025 recruiting class, but it can be at least 20 minutes or so talking about Pitt's 2025 recruiting class. Why would we be talking about Pitt's 2025 recruiting class as we sit here on May, 26th, 2025, and half of that class is already enrolled and the other half will be here in 2 weeks? Why would we be sitting here talking about these guys? Because Pitt just added another player to the 2025 recruiting class, and it happened on Wednesday. We didn't get a chance to really talk about it on Thursday's Morning Pitt. We had a different topic to discuss, and then of course Friday was the mailbag, and you can't interrupt the pattern and the routine and the schedule. We do the mailbag on Friday, so I figured, you know what? That's all right. We'll save the new commitment talk for Monday, and then we'll roll that into a larger discussion about the 2025 recruiting class and which one of those freshmen, or which ones of those freshmen, might get on the field for Pitt this season. Let's talk about the new commitment. Let's talk about how he's going to be here, why he's going to be here so soon, and let's talk about what this recruiting class looks like. These guys who are already on campus as freshmen and they're enrolling, and the other guys that'll be here just in a couple weeks to get ready for their freshman year and the start of their careers at Pitt. Let's talk a little recruiting and incoming freshmen here on the Memorial Day episode of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's a Monday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, hanging out with you today. As we do every day of the week, Monday through Friday. We wouldn't skip it just because it's Memorial Day. You think we were going to take this day off? No. I mean, it helped that we had something to talk about. I guess if I didn't have anything to talk about, maybe we would have skipped it. But we have something to talk about, so we'll get into the conversation. We'll give you a little Pitt content, a little Pitt video content here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We always ask you to do, like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content. Monday through Friday, we have these morning Pitt videos. We have our weekly live show every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. We've got post-game shows and interviews and all kinds of stuff, press conferences, everything you can need on the Pitt video side of things right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe, and you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. Then head over to the website, Panther-Lair.com. We're going to be talking a lot of Pitt recruiting today, and the place to get all that Pitt recruiting coverage is right there, Panther-Lair.com. We cover Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, transfer portal, everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. You're going to find it at Panther-Lair.com. And message boards to talk to other Pitt fans, Panther-Lair.com. All right, yeah, so Pitt added a new commitment, but it's not a recruit who's in the 2026 class. It's not somebody who's just finishing up their junior year of high school and they're going to be a senior in the fall and they'll sign in December and enroll in January or next June or whatever it is. It's a recruit in the 2025 class, which means he'll be graduating from high school actually in about 3 days. I think he graduates on like Thursday, I think it is. He's graduating from high school, from Latrobe High School, and then enrolling at Pitt in a couple weeks as a true freshman. His name is John Wetzel, and given that this happened last Wednesday, you're probably already familiar with his story, but we'll go over it real quick anyway. John Wetzel was sort of a do-everything star for Latrobe this past season. Well, throughout his high school career, he was the starting point guard for the basketball team, played both ways for the football team, the quarterback and the safety, was just kind of the leading everything, leading passer, leading rusher, probably a leader in a lot of defensive stats, but we couldn't find all of those. But he kind of did everything. A really good athlete. Always kept getting recruited to play to run for the track team. But he declined those invitations from the Latrobe track coach so he could focus on his football lifting and whatnot. But he signed with Marshall last December. He committed to Marshall out of high school. I think last June he committed to Marshall. He signed with Marshall in December. And of course, like 3 days after signing day or 4 days after signing day, Marshall's coach left. And the Thundering Herd had to have a coaching change. They brought in Tony Gibson. You remember Tony Gibson, former West Virginia assistant, which is way back. He's had a number of jobs since then, but he was at Pitt for a year in 2011, and he's a head coach at Marshall. And for whatever reason, John Wetzel decided sort of late in the spring, late in the cycle, that he didn't want to go to Marshall anymore. So he got out of his letter of intent there, didn't really make a big deal out of it publicly, didn't really publicize that he was, had received his release, just kind of quietly went about his business trying to find schools, see who was interested, got a couple interested schools. And when Pitt was one of them, John Wetzel felt like he didn't need to look any further. Pretty much committed a week or two ago, took his visit on Wednesday, made it official, signed, enrolled, did all the paperwork. Everything is, all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. John Wetzel is going to Pitt. So who is John Wetzel? What is it on the field? We just sort of gave you the background on him. Like I say, he plays both ways, or played both ways at Latrobe. He'll play defense at Pitt. He's a 6 foot, 195-pound athlete. He says that's a little bit lighter. He's been in the 200-pound range, 200, 203, somewhere around there in the past. He said the Pitt coaches think he's got the frame to get back up to that size and be around that size. He'll start off his career at safety, probably playing the boundary safety position. He seems like a good fit there. And then depending on how he grows and how he fills out his frame, he could potentially move to outside linebacker. He said his meetings with the Pitt coaches on Wednesday were sort of it was sort of split between Corey Sanders, the safeties coach, and Ryan Manilak, the linebackers coach, because they really see him having the potential to play at either one of those positions. Boundary safety until he outgrows it and becomes big enough to play the star linebacker. They seem to like his potential at both. And it sounded like he said he had conversations with the strength staff, and they felt like he could grow that he's got the frame that he could add the kind of weight to be a linebacker. And they might look at him and say, well, he doesn't look that big. He's listed at 6 foot 195. He doesn't look like he might have that frame. But remember, they've brought in guys who are not that big coming out of high school. Kyle Lewis was not that big coming out of high school. And I'm not going to say that John Wetzel is Kyle Lewis, but what I will say is that just the size alone is not reason to disqualify him from potentially playing linebacker. And the Pitt coaches told him that right now they need safeties more than linebackers, so they feel a little bit better about their depth at linebacker, although ideally you're not relying on any of these freshmen to fill a two-deep role at a position like linebacker or even boundary safety. But they felt like they could use him more at safety than linebacker, which is why they're starting him there. Maybe if the depth situation or the roster situation was different, they would feel like they could start him at linebacker. Either way, John Wetzel I would think, will be a guy who comes in red shirts, grows, develops, grows physically, learns the defense, and then finds a home either boundary safety or star linebacker. A guy like John Patrician wasn't all that big coming out of high school, ended up being a really good fit at that star linebacker position. And I feel like it's a conversation we've had for a while now. On the mailbag, actually. That was like one of the first questions we had in last week's mailbag. Was has Pitt changed its recruiting philosophy at linebacker? Are the coaches going after different types of players maybe than they did in the past? And it was partially, I think, inspired by the pursuit of John Wetzel and partially just inspired by the trends at linebacker. And the reality is, I think they've been going for these types of players pretty much since they've gotten here. We talked about that on Friday in the mailbag. We went down the list of linebackers they've signed since 2017 or so. And a lot of them fit that mold of smaller guys who might have played safety in high school, guys who might be looked at by other schools as not fast enough to play safety and not big enough to play linebacker. Well, Pitt says we will take those guys and we will make them linebackers. So I think when you look at John Wetzel, you might question, can he grow into be a linebacker? Is he quick enough to be a safety? Do you really get all that excited about a guy who's signing this late in the process? Although typically when you have those kinds of stories, I feel like those guys are hanging out there. They're not already signed to a school. John Wetzel, it's not like there were no other schools that saw him as an FBS prospect. He was signed to go to Marshall, and so he's not entirely just hanging out there hoping to get noticed. But at the same time, you kind of wonder, well, why is this guy available, and what do you really expect out of it? I think to that I would say, look, if there are any positions where this staff has probably earned the benefit of the doubt to some extent, linebacker and safety would be two of them, right? They're pretty good at recruiting those spots and finding what they need from those spots, and they've been pretty good about it for a number of years now. And so whether they like John Wetzel as a safety or they like him to move to outside linebacker, they've got a pretty good track record. Just like, after a few years, everybody kind of came to trust Charlie Partridge when it came to identifying defensive linemen. and finding the right guys to fit his system and how he wanted to coach and what he thought he could develop and all of that, the evaluation piece and the development piece. We all came to say, well, hey, if Charlie Partridge likes him, that's good enough for me. And sometimes that worked out and sometimes it didn't. But I think we're at that point right now with Corey Sanders with the safeties and Ryan Manilak with the linebackers. And maybe to a certain extent, Archie Collins with the corners. But the safeties and linebackers, I feel like in particular, Ryan Manilak has really honed in that position. And I think he's got it in a really good place, a really strong place in terms of the top-end talent, the depth, the rotation. I think the linebackers are going to be strength this year just like they were a year ago. And then Corey Sanders with the safeties, I mean, they have just, you talk about just year after year rolling guys out there and just not having that much drop-off. Some years are better than others. Some guys are better than others. But for the most part, there hasn't been that much drop-off from, year to year at those safety positions. So whether it's safety or linebacker, however they see John Wetzel, figuring in, I think we can give them, I don't want to say the benefit of the doubt. It depends on how you perceive it. To me, I watched John Wetzel's film, and I mean, he's making plays. He's all over the place making plays on both sides of the ball. He looks like a really good player. So to me, I say, hey, seems like a nice player to add to your roster. And throw in the fact that he's at positions where, these coaches have done a pretty good job recently. And I say, well, I think it looks like a good ad. Now, we'll see what John Wetzel does this season. We'll see if he gets on the field. I would guess not, and not for any huge reason other than they just don't typically use a lot of freshmen. Wetzel could use a year to develop that frame unless they feel like he could help them on special teams. But who else from that freshman class could get on the field this year? Maybe I should have saved this for another day and done a full episode on it. But a few guys that come to mind. I mean, I think a running back is going to have to be in play this season. I think it'll probably be Ja'Karian Turner, the true freshman who enrolled in January and had a really good spring camp, impressed the coaches, had a good high school career, but had a really good spring camp. And I think made his case for playing time. And they're going to need running backs to play. You've got Desmond Reed, and that's great. And you've got Juelz Goff, and that seems pretty good. But that's like two guys. You don't know where Derek Davis is going to be because he's been hurt. And after that, it's all true freshmen, right? So some of those guys are going to have to play. And I think Turner's probably going to be the one who's most likely to get out there, probably in the number 3 role behind Reed and Goff. I think Turner will be pretty good in that role. I think the two, actually all 3 of the freshman wide receivers, they were all here in the spring, and I think they all did a really good job. Bryce Yates and Tony Kinsler and Cam Sapp. Those guys, you heard their names come up a lot. When you interviewed the coaches, when you interviewed the players, throughout spring camp, their names came up a lot as guys who were making plays, making an impact, and would have a chance to make an impact this year. So, I think those 3 receivers are all going to have a chance to play. There's more depth at wide receiver, than there is at running back in terms of bodies and even to some extent experience. But I think there are going to be opportunities for wide receivers to crack into this rotation. I think there should be very few guys in that wide receiver room who feel like they've got a job locked up. And it might just be Kenny Johnson. Raphael Williams and Sincere Lee, they're experienced guys. They're veteran players with a lot of history in this offense. But they were both just okay last year, and they both missed spring camp due to injury. Now, I don't, I think at some point they'll both be back. I would expect Williams at the very least to be back for the start of spring or start of training camp. Blech, that was a hard one to get out. And Lee will be back at some point as well. But I don't know if either guy did anything last year to just make you say, wow, that guy's definitely got to be part of the rotation. They both had their moments, but I don't know if anybody really made you stand up and say, like, okay, that's got to be one of their top 3 receivers. So I think even if the jobs aren't completely open, they're open enough. You know what I mean? Like, there's a crack there that if you go out and make plays like a Tony Kinsler or Bryce Yates or a Cam Sapp or a Deuce Spann or a Blue Hicks or whoever it might be, Tyreek Robinson, Zion Fowler, like any of these guys, I think could have an opportunity. And, that bodes well for the freshmen. It means they've got a chance. But I think the freshmen also did well for themselves this spring and established themselves as potentially, being deserving of a role. So I think there's a chance there. Moving elsewhere throughout the offense, Max Hunt looks like he's going to need some time before he can really contribute at tight end, and they brought in the transfer Justin Holmes, so they shouldn't need to go to the true freshman. Mason Heinschel, we've talked about that a lot, the quarterback, whether he can be on the field this year and, maybe compete for a job, push for the number 2 job, push for the number 1 job. Who knows? We'll see about that, but we've talked about that a lot. Heinschel, the future's really bright there. The offensive lineman, there shouldn't be any rookie or freshman offensive linemen who get on the field this season. Defensively, I'm just looking through my list. I don't think any of the defensive linemen should play. And, Manny Taylor and Justin Thompson, the linebackers, probably should be able to redshirt. And then, you really get back into the secondary. And I think what you're watching there is probably Josh Gurrier. Maybe Sean Lee, the kid from Harrisburg, could have a chance to crack into the rotation at corner. I think he made some plays this spring and looks pretty impressive and pretty interesting. I don't know if corner is wide open because there's a handful of veterans there, but I think the right player could make his way onto the field on special teams and maybe a handful of defensive snaps. And I feel the same way about Josh Gurrier at safety. There's good depth at safety, good players at safety. But Josh Gurrier was really good this spring, and I think he's going to be a really good player at Pitt. Again, that next guy just kind of rolling through there as they go year after year. Corey Sanders just keeps that position group stacked. And I think Josh Gurrier looks like the next guy coming up. Now, the next guy after Javon McIntyre and Cruz Brookins and Jesse Anderson and Kavir Baines-Marquez and Alan Bryant, because they've done well there. They've recruited well at that position group, but I think Gurrier can be really good and maybe have a chance to get out on the field this year. So we'll talk more about the freshmen who can play. We're going to talk about running backs this week because it is running back week on Panther-Lair.com. We'll talk about everything that goes on in the world of basketball recruiting. We'll see if Pitt makes any moves or gets noticed for anything transfer-wise on that front. And we'll just keep counting down to the start of training camp in August. More, pressing than that, we'll be counting down to the big official visit weekends that are coming up in June. And that's next weekend. Not this weekend, but next weekend. So you got about a week and a half. And I think the visits actually go Thursday to Saturday. So it really is like a week and a half from now. They'll be on their official visit weekends, and we'll have a lot of recruiting to talk about then. But in the meantime, thought we'd talk about this 2025 recruiting class since they just added another player. So that's the latest on that. Thanks for tuning in today. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Enjoy your Memorial Day. Cook some dogs and some burgers. Hopefully the weather stays nice, and we will catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.